Ramon is a multi-dimensional space holder and teacher and professor and facilitator of many different modalities that I think he will be better qualified to explain than I, but I know that Ramon is a professor at Naropa University and was actually my professor at Naropa University. So I'm pretty lucky to get my professor for an event now. And I've always thought of Ramon as a friend and really special mentor that has a lot of gifts with helping support and guide people through their process. And so I know Ramon also does a lot with dance and movement practice, and also has a deep relationship to spiritual traditions, astrology, magic, and something that we're very closely involved with, which is kind of the ancient science of initiation and rite of passage into new degrees of consciousness, of maturity, of growing into your new self and letting go of the old self, which Ramon kind of facilitated a symbolic introduction to that sort of initiation for students at Naropa when I was there. And I believe now Ramon is also teaching courses on environmental justice at Naropa. So right on point for this particular conference that we're hosting this time, which is the Sustainable Living Conference. And yeah, so environmentalism, social justice, movement practice, and then on that kind of deeper inner level, also bringing in initiation, astrology, rite of passage, and connecting it all together. From what I understand, that's my kind of flawed introduction, but hopefully Ramon can fix it. So we're super honored and grateful to have you here with us today. Thanks for coming. And we're all excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Right on. Okay, thank you, Yasha. And welcome, Worldchangers. Thank you all for having me here, whatever here is. Let's see, a couple of things. I think the first thing I want to do is actually just, I just want to say something about the fact that I worked with Yasha as a student, and I'm not trying to just spotlight you, but you're the only person I know here, right? Work with you as a student, Yasha, and you came in with the seed of what I'm seeing in front of me in your belly already. You already knew where you were going in a way. And I kind of watched from the sidelines, you sort of manifest this situation. And so I just want to say props to really following your dream and following your passion. And now it looks, you know, that you've co-created this space where like other people can grow and seek their own dreams. So it's just pretty awesome to see that. And I wish I could have been there in person with you all, but I got COVID, so I'm here. Okay, so we've got, let's see, 2 people on Zoom, and then the rest of y'all are in a room, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and it's, how many people do you have in the room? You got 30, 40, 50?
Yeah, just over 20, and there might be a few more coming in.
Okay, so I want to try something that would have worked a lot better, probably, if we were in real space. But I want to try an illustration before I get into the topic of our talk and the content. And the illustration is going to require at least 2 volunteers. So one, I'd like somebody to, if somebody would be willing to like stand up in the room. Okay, great. All right, what's your name, person?
Hi, I'm Lo. Good to meet you.
Lo?
Yes.
Okay, Lo. All right, thank you, Lo. Lo's our first illustrator. Okay, and do you have any rattles or drums or bells in the room?
You know it.
Of course. Okay, great. Okay. So do you all know where the north, south, and east are in the room?
Yes.
Of course.
Can you locate them?
Yes. East.
No.
Okay.
North. North. East. South. West.
A little
Okay.
different. West is the mountains, east is the sunrise. So south, north.
But the mountains are right there.
There. Okay.
Okay, so Lo, let's have you start approximately in the east.
Facing east. Or
No, if you could walk around the circle until you're sort of, if you were imagining the circle with 4 compass points and you were where the east would be. Okay, so if someone can help her.
I have a compass using directly that direction.
Yeah.
That face. Yeah.
Facing east or facing
Yeah.
east facing.
You don't have to face east. You can just be just like you are. That's great. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna play with the idea of cycles. Okay. And our cycle is gonna start and end in the east. Okay. Now we'll go from, let's go ahead and walk from, let's walk from the east to the south, to the west, to the north, and back to the east, okay?
So not quite one full circle, like 3/4 and then back to the east.
No, you'll go all the way around. So you'll go east to south, to west, to north, back to the east, okay? And one moment. I know this is kind of weird. You got some guy telling you what to do over remote control and TV. Okay. It'd be something else if we were in the room. So what we're gonna do is and Lo, you're gonna just do this approximately. I'd like for you to check in for a moment and see if there's something that you are contemplating or questioning in your life right now, or if there's something you want to do. Okay? There's no need to speak it, but just see if you can locate it. And when you're ready with that something, let us know.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. All right, so as you move around the circle, when you find yourself in the south, you might consider, what are some early steps you need to take to make it happen? Okay, and just put this in your subconscious. You don't even have to remember it. When you find yourself in the west, think about how you can show it or display it to others. When you're in the north, consider how you might share it. And as you head back to east, what do you have to do to kind of let it go and make space for something else? Okay? So you take your time. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I have all 4 of those. So the south is the first steps to take to get to this goal. The west is how do I show it to myself or outwardly?
Outwardly.
Okay. And then the north is how do I bring other people into
Yeah, how do you start to share it?
share it? Okay. And then walking back is
Yeah, as you
Full
complete, yep,
okay.
as you complete,
All the way back east is to think of how to let it go.
yeah, start to let it go so you can make space for the next thing. Okay? And as you take your time, you walk that circle at whatever speed that's good for you. And when Lo comes back to her starting point there in the east, Yasha, hit that drum.
All right.
All right. So as you're ready, Lo.
Do I want Can I just pause for each direction and just take a minute to make it so? And then don't say anything out loud, right?
Yeah, you're welcome to pause at each one. You do it how it makes sense to you. All right, and let's take an inhale, exhale with low. Okay, anything you feel like sharing, any observations, anything you noticed?
I had a realization that in the letting go of this thing that I am really trying to work through, the letting go of this in order to fully shut the scan and move on to the next level of being, I have to release my judgment of myself, but also like a judgment of others. I have to be completely at peace with every single human being exactly where they're at, and not feel in any way like I've come so far and they have so far to go. Like I have to release completely into that space of unconditional love, and that is the only thing that's going to carry me to the next level.
Right on, thank you. Let's get some snaps below. Yeah, some important lessons there. You know, y'all are called the Worldchangers, right? Like a lot of us who are interested in creating the new or stopping the old or doing something different, there oftentimes that judgment arises, that sense of like what's wrong with everyone else, kind of. I mean, I know I've definitely felt that. I definitely feel it many times. And it takes something to really both accept what is and continue to work for what could be. So this is a really kind of particular poise, I think, that we need to have. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for illustrating that for us. Okay, I need 2 more volunteers. All right, 2 hands, I see. Okay, great. All right, so let's, yeah, both of y'all, if you be willing to stand up, and let's have the individual in the black shirt, if you could kind of step into the circle. Okay. Okay. Okay, and you're going to maybe take 1 more step forward. All right. Okay. Now, what I have both of y'all do is walk in the same direction that Lo walked, okay? But the person on the outside of the circle, you stay kind of further out, okay? And you'll take really slow, measured steps, you know, maybe a step of breath, okay? And the person in the inner circle, I'm gonna ask you to move faster, okay? And Yasha, every time the person in the inner circle laps the person in the outer circle, hit that drum, okay? And the rest of us, breathing, watching what, or feeling and noticing what we notice as folks pass through the space, okay? And, okay, is everyone clear? All right, starting east, great. And go. Stop right there. Great. Okay. Walkers, any observations? Yeah, please.
I noticed his pace make me naturally quicken my own pace.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. I noticed you started off pretty slowly, and after the first pass, you kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and then I caught myself and was mindful of how quickly or slowly I was moving with my breath.
Yes, nice.
I noticed that, yeah, the first time I lapped you, my heart started speeding up. I was like getting excited. I was like, oh, this is something. But then I caught, you know, I realized that it's like I had these thoughts of maybe I should try to go faster and see how many times I can lap her. And then I was also thinking, you know, like give her some grace and not run past her 100 times. So I was definitely very much thinking of like my own pace, but also how it related to you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, great. How about people in the audience? Maybe one or two observations. What did y'all notice on the periphery?
I was just thinking to myself as they were walking that if they were performing the same ritual with the east, south, west, and north, that they would have different time frames to like really internalize what they were thinking of. And maybe the person on the inside was able to hold on to and release multiple things with less degree, maybe than one person with a full lap would do with more extent, you know, if that makes sense.
Really speak up, y'all. It's hard for me to hear you over this little box.
Hold the mic close.
It looked like they lapped each other almost at the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. Like they lapped and they ended up syncing up so that happened again at the east at the very, very end. I don't know that they were consciously doing it. I was definitely watching and thinking it, but yeah, it was really cool to see that happen.
Yeah, sort of possibly lapping each other north, south, east, and west. Okay, so something you might also notice with the north, south, east, and west. Okay, I'm gonna illustrate it. Okay, let's say this is east. Let's say this is south, west, north. You're at 0 degrees. You're at 90. You're at 180. You're at 270. You're back at 360. Okay. So first of all, let's snap for our second group. Volunteers, thank you all for jumping up and listening to some remote guy. So what we just tried to do is illustrate 2 different kinds of cycles. Okay. And the first cycle was sort of an illustration of how some people think about the lunar cycle. Okay, the lunar cycle is one use of it is sort of to map how things grow, how they begin, they grow, they come into fullness, and then they decline and go back into what made them. Okay, and the second cycle is more looking at two different entities or bodies in relationship to one another. Okay, so for our purposes for this talk, you can think of the second cycle as the cycle of two planets in relationship to one another. Okay, and our friend with the hat who is moving more slowly is representing, say, a planet that's far out from the Earth and therefore has a really slow cycle around the sun. Let's say the sun is the drummer, the projector in the middle of the room. And then the inner planet is this planet that has a faster cycle, maybe let's say like Mars. Okay, and every time they cross each other, it's equivalent to when the person who walked the moon cycle came back to the east. Every time those two planets cross each other, it's the beginning in relationship to those two planets, it's the beginning of a new cycle. Okay, so you have two kinds of cycles. You have a cycle of position and a cycle of relationship. And both of those are relevant for the rest of our conversation. So with that, I'm going to jump into screen share. Okay, everyone see it?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Come on. Working slow. Huh. 1 second, y'all. There we go. Okay. So the topic of this talk, whenever it shows up, okay, as above, so below, astrological strategy for climate and social justice. Okay. So I kind of just showed y'all, we kind of just did it out in real space. The cycle, this is an illustration of the cycle of the moon and some meanings that are attributed to the moon cycle. Okay. And it's not just the moon cycle. The moon is a symbol for every kind of cycle that we go through in our lives, right? So we have an impulse. We start to grow it. We got to work for it. At this point, we got to really make it show. And then boom, full moon, it's there. Other people can see it. And then disseminating, we start to give it away and share it. And then gradually, yeah, that was great. Good party. Now we got to let it go. What do we learn? What might we do differently next time? Or how do we begin again? Okay. So both of those cycles, the single and the double cycles, work like that. We can look at this, a single day working like that. We can look at a year. We could look at centuries. So the question that I'd like to really explore in this talk is how can we as individuals and organizations develop visions, strategies, and actions that utilize this potent time in the outer planetary cycles to forward the works of food, environmental, and climate justice / the building of just and sustainable communities. Okay. So I kind of first started to pay attention to, I've been an astrology buff for a little bit, but I started to pay attention to the outer planetary cycles around 2011. And there was something that a lot of people who were into astrology were talking about, astrologers were talking about, They were looking at a square formation between Uranus and Pluto. Okay. And a square formation, remember we talked about you go around the circle, it's north, south, east, and west. Okay. If your original point, say, let's say this is your original point in the east, then when you come to the south at 90 degrees, you are in what's called a square. Okay, to the original point. If you're opposite the original point, that's an opposition. And if you're 270 degrees, that's a square, but it's of a slightly different character. Okay. So a lot of astrologers are talking about Uranus and Pluto going into a square relationship and how that was going to have a significant impact on behavior and on our society. And part of the reason they think that planets like Uranus and Pluto will have big time behaviors on or impacts on society is because their orbit is very slow. Right? The moon goes through all 12 signs of the zodiac in a month. Goes through all 12, 2 days apiece. So its effects are constant and they're constantly changing. But a planet like Pluto will stay in a sign between 12 and in some cases 20, 21 years. Uranus stays in signs about 7 years apiece. And so these planets are thought to impact the behavior and the energy configuration of entire generations in some cases. So that was interesting to me. And I was also told that Uranus was going to go into Aries. And in the zodiac cycle, Aries is the equivalent of the new moon. It's the equivalent of the point east, where low started. It's the beginning of the whole cycle, springtime. Okay. And so people said when Uranus goes into Aries, it's going to be explosive. Okay. Because Uranus is thought to symbolize those energy qualities in our world of sudden change, of accidents, of spontaneity, and of things being overturned. And it's also thought to represent electricity and the rapid communication of ideas in mass. And because of that, it's thought to represent revolutions, right? That mixture of things turning over quickly and ideas spreading quickly. So there were people saying when Uranus moves into Aries, we might see a lot of explosive energy from people in the mass wise. And then Pluto is thought to represent, you know, if we look at mythology, Greek mythology, Pluto is invisible. He has a crown of invisibility. And Pluto is under the earth. And so it rules kind of wealth. And it rules secretly. So Pluto is thought to represent oftentimes our unconscious striving for power and for importance and for dominance. And it represents that in part because it also shows us that as human beings, we're part of these really large, slow evolutionary forces, and we only have a blip in time in them. And so sometimes we try to control things under the illusion that we can actually, you know, that we actually have control or significance in a way. And when they come together in a square is a tense relationship. And it means that you can meet resistance. And so people thought, oh my gosh, the dominant powers, the powers that be, Capricorn also represents like large scale institutions like banks, governance, father figures. Uranus Aries is kind of like the punk or the rebel. And so people said, wow, there's going to be a lot of resistance and push and pull between the kind of punk rebel energy of Uranus and Aries and the establishment and the desire control energy of Pluto and Capricorn. So I marked the day that Uranus moved into Aries on my calendar. And I believe it was, I'm trying to remember, it was either in March or April of 2011. I had it on my calendar, and the night that it moved into Aries, this happened. Now, you might recognize this. This is Fukushima, Japan. And the night that Uranus moved into Aries, there was an underwater earthquake that triggered the tsunami that slammed into the island and then flooded the nuclear reactors there. Okay, and ended up spreading toxicity all over the island and into the ocean. You know, and I was just shocked by that. I was just blown away. You know, because it's like I kind of believe these things, but to see that and have it had it on my calendar for, you know, months in advance, it was very shocking to me, and it really caused my attention to stand out. And in the ensuing years, a lot of what I had read from other astrologers about the reaction and the kind of public and social struggles that were taking place seemed to play out. You know, you had Occupy Wall Street. You had the first wave of Black Lives Matter. You had I Don't Know More, Canada. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia. And even though I'm not necessarily aligned with these kind of politics, even the Tea Party, I think in some ways is a manifestation of the same energy. So it's kind of spontaneous people's movements that had been working on issues that in some ways seemed very underground. And if you were in touch with them, then it made sense when they surfaced. But a lot of people were very surprised by these sudden mass mobilizations. And so, you know, one question is, you know, what were a lot of these movements struggling over, right? And I think we all know, I think we all understand these things, but I kind of want to just do a bit of a refresher. You know, some of these movements were struggling over sustainability or access to environment, environmental safety, okay? And I think it's possible for us to think about, yesterday, who was the elder? I'm forgetting his name. Maestro Rufio, was that his name?
Maestro Manuel Rufino.
Yeah. So I caught the last part of his talk, which was really both soothing and strengthening. And, you know, he talked about greed. And he talked about people's desire to get, causing them to make foolish and rash and destructive choices. And so I think if we look at sustainability in some ways, part of what we see is it's partly a manifestation of greed. Okay, and it's an imbalance that's a result of greed. Right. So and the imbalance is that the people in the present are taking too much from the future. And we really need to kind of rebalance and prioritize future needs in relationship to present needs. Okay, in terms of social justice, what you see is dominant groups in any society can take more than they need, and they often take from the marginalized groups. Okay. So whereas sustainability, what we're trying to do is balance the needs of the present with the needs of the future, and also kind of stay within ecosystem limits in terms of how we create our human settlement. In terms of social justice, what we're looking at is how do we create balance between groups with different power in society, and how do we open up access to resources, wealth, power, decision-making processes, and so on, and with a particular focus of how do we rebalance those groups that have been taken from. And so you can kind of see these two working together in a way where, you know, if we kind of look at this crossroads, this axis is sort of like the historical injustice, right? Colonization, conquest, things that happened in the quote past have present day consequences for certain groups. And I think if we look all over the world, we see that the groups that are most marginalized in a particular society are usually the current and or historical victims of some type of act of violence, some type of act of land theft, displacement, cultural destruction, and so on, right? So the situation these groups find themselves in didn't start yesterday. And it's not just a matter of personal choice or lack of personal agency, okay? It's part of a historical or karmic chain of violence that people are trying to free themselves from. And with sustainability, we see here the present generation's overconsumption, okay? And that overconsumption, by the way, tends to be clustered in privileged areas of society. That present generation's overconsumption leads to future generation scarcity, pollution, and climate instability. So in that axis right there, you basically have the basis for climate justice activism and movement, and a definition in a way of climate justice, right? Because with climate justice, we're not just talking about the changes in CO2 levels and how that's affecting the climate. We're talking about the fact that some parts of the world, us, put out more, CO2 into the atmosphere and create the atmospheric disturbances that have a higher impact on the tropical belt and the nations of the global south. And historically, those same nations were engaged in colonization. The nations in the north were engaged in colonization and resource theft and human theft and exploitation of the nations of the global south. And so the pattern of climate justice it's the same pattern. It's the same dynamic as colonization. And if we want to understand food justice, environmental justice, and climate justice, we need the same lens to understand each one of them. It's the same problem, it's just acting in different scales and in different facets of the societal and ecological life. So a lot of those movements were struggling over these issues, okay? They're struggling, this is another concept that might be useful for y'all, struggling over ecological debt, okay? The debt accumulated by northern industrial countries towards third world countries on account of resource plundering and use of environmental space to deposit wastes, okay? So ecological debt or environmental space, those terms are used interchangeably. It's basically the idea that any person, any group, community, nation, there's a certain amount of earth that we all need to live and to grow. And that beyond that need, we start to get into greed. And when we get into greed, we get into injustice and we imbalance those scales. You might hear this also in terms when people talk about if everyone lived like North Americans on planet Earth, we would need 4 Earths. So then as North Americans, like we are kind of equivalently using 4 Earths, whereas if you look at people in India, it might be 1.5. And if you look at people in Africa, it might be 0.75. Okay, so all this living within ecological limits is directly connected with issues around justice and around access and who can take from whom and so on. And so a lot of those movements that we saw were movements to resist either social injustice or ecological injustice, or the nexus of them. Okay. So jumping back into these outer planetary cycles, I think we can all say, right, that we're living in a new world now. You know, 2020, the world post 2020 is a new world. It's a new situation. There's a new set of expectations out there, you know, than there were before the 2020s. And there have also been a lot of astrologers who've been tracking the astrology of the 2020s. And we're saying ahead of time, wow, the year 2020 and the entire decade is going to be a really momentous time. And as people who are just curious and who are studying history or paying attention to the world around them, I think one question that comes up is why are some moments more intense than others? Why are some moments more ripe for change than others? Why are some moments more placid and integrated than others? And when you look at things astrologically, you kind of get a sense of how that occurs. Okay, so in the 2020s, out of the 9 total outer planetary cycles, I believe there's 9 total, 6 of them are resetting this decade. Okay, and the reset is remember when our friends, the slower and the faster planet pass each other. Every time the faster planet passes and Yasha hit the drum, that's the reset. And 6 of those outer planetary cycles are resetting within this decade. If you compare it to the last 2 decades, you only had 1 or 2 resets per decade. If you compare it to the next 2, you've got 3 in the 2030s, and I think 2 in the 2040s, and then the next is in the 60s. So one indication is that our decade is packed with a lot of potential for change. And interestingly, we've seen 3 of those outer planetary conjunctions happen in 2020 alone. Right? So this one is the one earlier I was just kind of using as illustration. January 12th, 2020, Saturn and Pluto conjuncted. Okay, that's a conjunction that happens approximately every 30 years. Shortly after, COVID was really kind of, the World Health Organization announced it January 9th, conjunction happened on the 12th. Jupiter and Pluto conjunction, April 5th. April 25th, George Floyd's murdered and the streets go berserk, like all over the planet, actually. Okay, now every conjunction has a effective range. Okay, and it's usually within 10 degrees on either side that conjunction is effective. And if we look here, the conjunction happened 24 degrees. And by the time of the uprisings there, 27 degrees, still within the effective range. Okay, December 21st, 2020, Saturn and Jupiter conjuncted 0 degrees Aquarius. Okay, and January 6th, 2021, Jupiter and Saturn were at 2, they were basically between 2 and 4 degrees apart from that point, and we had the Capitol riots. Okay, now these conjunctions happen every so many decades, and so it's like, why do they seem to be so potent right now? I don't really know, but I think part of it is the fact that the pandemic forced us all into a collective situation. And because of that, I think that people are actually more responsive and in tuned and potentially reactionary on a collective level right now. And so as these outer planets move, the impacts that might have been scattered because people weren't as collectively oriented, say earlier in the millennium, I think they're having a stronger impact now because so much of people's attention has been funneled through these things in part, right? Through social media and whatnot. And so there's sort of a group mind, and in the negative sense, a group think that's happening. One other thing I want to point out, and I could do a whole talk on this, and there's plenty of stuff online if folks are curious, and you probably already heard of it. Pluto, the planet Pluto has a cycle of 250 years, and it just in February reached back to the point where it was when the United States was born, right, during the Declaration of Independence. So that's called a Pluto Return. And what that signifies to astrologers is that whole cycle of energy that Pluto is involved with. And remember, again, it's oftentimes this desire to control things. The United States has completed a cycle, just as Lo did, and maybe could learn from how we have used power and how we've hidden it from ourselves for the past 250 years, or pretty much the entire life of this nation. And so when that conjunction happened, okay, I think it also was connected to this Pluto situation. And I think part of what we saw at the Capitol was that there's this big struggle that we're having over, I think there's a big struggle between the people who have some knowledge and who have internalized how the US has used its power and how we've been just or maybe not so just with it, and those that haven't internalized that, and I believe therefore continue to enact it. Okay, so this is sort of an image of all of those cycles collectively. I did not create this image. I believe it's called, from a website called World Clocks. And it kind of gives you a description of what each cycle symbolically could represent or how it might shape society. Okay. Now, 3 of those outer planetary cycles have already passed, and one of them just passed in April. And actually, we're still within the effective range. Okay. And then there are 2 more that are coming. So part of what I'm curious about, in a minute, I'm going to turn y'all over to yourselves and to do some thinking about this. Part of what I'm curious about is, I don't think as human beings we can really predict the future. But as you look at these outer planetary cycles in the last many years, it seems that they are indicators of moments of really potent change or agitation in our collective field. And what I do think we can do as human beings is we can get a sense of what's coming, and we can start to orient our actions in a way to be effective given what types of energies could be in play. In other words, if you're a surfer and the waves are big, if you can handle those waves, go ride them. If not, sit on the shore. Right? And so I think these cycles give us, or these conjunctions give us an indication of some waves that are coming. Okay. So what I'm kind of proposing is that as people who are world changers, who are interested in, involved in the work of helping society develop new ways of doing business, new ways of relating, or maybe old ways of relating, that are interested in helping society become more just, more sustainable, more visionary, more creative, that we can start to use these cycles to strategize and plan. Okay, now we're used to thinking about astrology on personal levels as a psychological reflection tool or spiritual, metaphorical kind of practice. But it was first used, actually, if you go back to the ancient Egyptians, and the ancient Chinese, the ancient Babylonians, you know, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians. It was used to sort of forecast the rise and fall of empires. And the reign of particular rulers. And people use it in the stock market now. You know, Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, she was well known to consult with an astrologer and give her husband state level advice based off of that. And so I think people who are involved in activism, healing, justice, world changer folks, this is also a practice and a tool that we might consider. So you got these next few, and I'm gonna kind of talk about them real quick, and then I'll turn y'all over to do some thinking together. Okay, so currently we have Uranus and Taurus. Uranus has moved from Aries to Taurus. When I saw that move of Uranus to Taurus, I thought, okay, Uranus, as we have already established, is this energy of sudden change, of disruption, of rebellion, of surprise. Taurus is the sign of making a productive relationship to earth and soil and matter. You know, it symbolizes laborers, farms, sculpture, okay? And it symbolizes us kind of having like stability in ourselves, in part because we have a stable root to the earth. And so when I saw these two coming together, I thought, you know, I think it's going to be a good time for any kind of activism, especially that's earth-based. Okay, so as all that's happening, these are those last three conjunctions that are coming the rest of the decade. The Jupiter-Neptune conjunction already happened, April 12th, okay? It's got an effective range that goes all the way to January 2023, okay? I think some of the energetic qualities of it is expansive, imaginative, empathic. I think it can help us really open up to the timeless, into like the ancestral realm, okay? Some of the negative qualities, terrible boundaries. We really need to focus on our boundaries at this time, okay? And that's personal and collective. People could be very potentially susceptible to like mass delusion right now. Okay, and there's other thing about Neptune that I could go into, but just a quick assessment. Strategic approach, possibly. Work below the rational level. Use images, art, movement, and implant a lot of new ideas that way, okay? The other piece is anything with water. Work with water. Incorporate water into your meetings. Incorporate it into your marketing, okay? Keyword, dream. Okay, so starting to really dream and envision, not envision yet, but dream, feel what's the next step that we can take as an individual, as an organization, as a society, community, what have you. Okay, the next one is coming in April of 2024 and has an impact zone from July 23 to June 24. Energetic quality, expansive, sudden, disruptive. A lot of insights could happen quickly, and people might be really responsive to new ideas very quickly and ready to shift on a dime. Okay, negatives, money could switch up real quick, and I think we're already seeing it. Earthquakes, explosions, a lot of accidents, right? Jupiter causes everything to expand. So whenever Jupiter comes together, that was another beautiful thing that happened in y'all's illustration, is the slower planet was affected by the faster one and wanted to speed up. And the faster planets start thinking, maybe I had to measure my steps a little bit. And that's what happens when these planets conjoin. Their energies blend and they either amplify or cancel out one another. So whatever Jupiter touches, it makes it get bigger. So if Uranus is already that energy of flip of expectations, when Jupiter touches it, and Jupiter also represents what people already believe. It represents our consensus agreed upon beliefs, whereas Uranus is like kind of dynamic change. So my feeling here is that when these two come together, it's an opportunity to shift a lot of collective beliefs quickly. Okay, strategic approach, ideation levels, diagrams, map out your plans, map out your visions, okay? Start to make sequences, budgets, concrete proposals, design models. And the key word there is design. Okay, and the last one, which is happening in 2026, and it's still within the range of Uranus being in Taurus. So its range is from February 25th to March 20, or February 2025 to March 2027. And again, the energetic quality here is expansive because of Neptune, but also contained because of Saturn. Saturn contains energy. It stops things. It puts up boundaries. It says no. It opposes us because its purpose is to actually make us more fortified in whatever it is that we are. So Saturn ultimately is about integrity. And it's about how societies or collectives codify their beliefs into laws and institutions. And so Saturn can also represent the status quo getting stuck in itself and stuck in its ways. Whereas Neptune is like water and it gradually melts everything. Okay, so the possibility here is that a lot of the large scale structures of society or institutionalized thinking could start to melt and be open to new possibilities and new dreams. Neptune's also about dreams. So what might seem utopian and unrealistic right now seems, or at that time, could be more realistic. A lot of negativity is basically, we could see a lot of resistance by a lot of reactionary forces. And a lot of the delusions from the earlier conjunctions can harden into dogma. And one place where I think that's where we all really have to be careful personally is the whole conspiracy theory thing. A lot of us who are cultural outliers are open to these ideas, which I think is good. And I think they can harden into paranoias. Strategic approach, take the dreams from the first conjunction that became plans in the second and manifest them, okay? Build the models that you design and start testing them out. Okay, so again, keyword manifest. So I've kind of described a three-part sequence potentially between these conjunctions that could be used for strategizing. What I'm going to ask you all to do now, time are we at?
This is just so juicy. We can keep going. Our next presenter is a pretty good friend, so I'll just tell him we're a few minutes behind. You can go longer.
Okay, what time are we at, Yasha?
You've actually got over 20 minutes more.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So let's take 12 minutes and maybe jump in groups of 3 and just start to think, how might you all start doing strategic plans for yourself, your family, community, so on, that might help forward climate justice or community building or what have you. And it can be concrete stuff that folks can talk about, or you could you could sit together and sort of draw. I mean, it could look a lot of different ways. Let's come together. You all take some time and just start seeing what bubbles up between you. And we'll take 12 minutes there and then we'll see where we are. And should I leave this question up?
Yes, please.
Yes.
We'll kind of start turning from our groups back into a larger circle. Yeah, okay. Well, maybe let's hear from maybe two groups, just brief, anything that came up or any questions or any of that. Any percolations?
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I live here. Nice to meet you. We were just talking. We talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that I think would be really helpful for us, just as a community here, that Alex suggested, is having like study groups to study like what's going on during that specific week or that month, astrologically, to help us kind of like plan better for the projects that we want to do, the things that we want to accomplish. Because I've noticed a pattern of like us planning certain things on certain days, and then we end up shifting what we're doing that day, or not doing that thing and doing something else, or delaying something or doing something. Like there's just a lot of things that end up changing, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with something that's going on astrologically that day or month, that we're just not really aware of. So
Yeah, thank you. Okay, how about group 2, another group?
hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So we were basically discussing something that you touched on a little bit earlier, which is the rise and fall of empires, and how it seems like there's kind of this pattern happening in like the initiation of a process around 2020, and then things kind of escalating coming toward 2026, and how that gives us a sort of a timeline to make choices and to prepare. We talked about what qualities we consider to be like factors in the fall of an empire, and how some of those revolve around like the devaluation of money, changes in trade and economic structures, and particularly food instability, which is often due to monocropping. And then we discussed how there's this slight difference, which is really important, in the definitions of revolution or evolution, and how we kind of get to decide whether we want to evolve into something new or to continue trying to revolve around the same paradigm, which might leave us stuck in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's an important consideration when we're thinking about things in terms of cycles, because I think part of the idea is that if you don't learn from a cycle, well, you just do it over. And often you do it over with more turbulence than the first time. So there is some kind of upshifting or some kind of depth that one has to, or has the opportunity to engage when you come back to the same point in the cycle. There's another cycle that's really interesting in terms of the United States, in terms of this question about the rise and fall of empires, which is the planets Neptune and Jupiter are in the same position as they were before the start of the American Civil War. And they haven't been in that position since that time. And so there are some people that feel that a lot of the energy qualities that we were dealing with as a society back then are up again in a very strong way. So yeah, so what are the kind of crucial factors that help us, that can help us ride out what looks in some ways like a collapse?
This is Morgan. I have a quick question. We have heard about the Pluto return.
Mm-hmm.
We have heard about the Saturn and Neptune position at the Civil War. I suppose it's safe to say that it was in the same position around the same amount of time prior to then, which would put it during the Revolutionary War.
You know, I can't say. I don't think so.
Okay.
The cycle of Jupiter and Neptune. Okay, those two planets cross each other every 13 years, but they will only cross in Pisces or in the same sign every 166 years. So 160 some odd, about 166 years ago, they crossed each other in Pisces. And that was right before the start of the Civil War.
Okay.
The Revolutionary War, we'd have to wind the clock back and look at exactly how much time the Revolutionary War was from the Civil War, and then try to see where the planets are. And you can do it, you know, you can get an ephemeris and you can check it out.
So where I was going with this was coming from the discussion on empires, the life cycle of empires. Are we looking at the end of the story of New Atlantis envisioned by Francis Bacon prior to 1776?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know how to respond to that exactly, except to say that there are cycles within cycles, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's the moon cycles happening every month. There's the solar cycles happening every day. There's the cycle of our in-breathing and out-breathing. It's happening moment to moment. And there are these huge, the cycle of, say, Pluto and Neptune is a 500-year cycle. So even, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think it's possible that even if this society is starting to crack, it might also be contained within a bigger cycle of something else that's trying to get created. It's hard to say. And so I've tried to confine my time. I've tried to make my time a little bit shorter, but long enough for us as human beings to still kind of plan. I'm just going to put a couple other things to y'all, and then I'll close this talk. These are some areas that I think between now and the end of the of Uranus's time in Taurus, which is like between now and 2026, that I think could be really fertile. And this is incomplete, y'all. I'm still working these things out. I'm still trying to figure them out. I'm inviting us to think together. But water rights, water protection, huge right now. Homeowners associations and neighborhood associations. My brother Mike Word was there with y'all yesterday. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike Word involved in green building, earthship architecture. One of the principal things that holds people back from construction innovation with their own properties are the neighborhood associations. You know, I think we have the opportunity to create neighborhood associations that actually promote these things. You know,
Yes.
farm workers' rights is a huge one. I'll talk about that one in a second. Zoning. So many of us are still, however you look at it, we're living in the city. You know, not everyone can be out in an intentional community. So how do we retrofit our cities? We got to work with zoning. Another one, food trade and food as a human right. I think between now and 2026, we can really push that. The land back and reparations movements. If you think about what I was kind of talking about in terms of historical injustice creating present day results, and if we are going to talk about new communities and intentional communities, a lot more people need access to land. And a lot of the peoples who were disenfranchised and stolen from lands need that access to land as well. And that's what a lot of the land back and reparations movements are about, is opening up land and resources, or returning land and resources in many cases. So yeah, those are just some thoughts I have. I work with an organization called Frontline Farming in Denver, doing food justice, food sovereignty, food security. And one of the things that we've done in the last few years is we passed a bill, the Agricultural Workers' Rights Bill in the state of Colorado. And among other things, it first of all ensures that agricultural workers have get paid a minimum wage, and that they have overtime, and that they can organize, they can be part of labor unions, okay? Or that they have guaranteed breaks, because a lot of farm workers in the United States and in many other parts of the country, they don't get it. I mean, in some cases, you're talking about degrees away from enslavement, okay? And so that was a bill that was passed by, in large part, the efforts of Frontline Farming in Denver. Another thing we're working on is we're developing a Colorado Water Equity Board. And we're really looking at who has rights to water and how, you know, water is distributed in this region, and how we're using it, and how we can become more intelligent and equitable in our use of water. And then the final one here, this is a link, and maybe I can put this in the chat. This is a link. I'm gonna turn off my screen share for a second. Oops, where am I? I'm gonna stop my share for a second, and I'm gonna switch to another screen really quickly just to show you all something. Okay. And I see my time is almost up. So this is a link to Frontline Farming's land campaign. And Frontline Farming, right, in addition to working on water and farm policy, we also operate 3 farms in the Denver metro area, and also 2 or more kind of smaller school community gardens. And we grow food and we serve food to, you know, the communities that we're from. We work with immigrant communities. We work with elder communities. We work with women who are escaping intimate partner violence and their children. We operate farm stands. We've got, you know, educational programs happening at all ages. My food justice students from Naropa frequently are visitors to Frontline Farming. And we have like a very powerful and just kind of kick-ass staff there that is deeply engaged in the production of food, but also in the whole kind of spectrum of food access and food legality and food production. And one of the things that we are working with that many food justice oriented organizations struggle with, and a lot of urban farming efforts struggle with, is long-term access to land. We have these short land tenures, and then when gentrification comes in, people can just push the community gardeners right out. And so we are currently engaged in this land campaign. And if y'all are interested, you know, you might be interested as individuals or as an organization donating to Frontline's efforts to have a longer term relationship to land. But I really see, and I don't totally understand what y'all are doing, but I really see the work of trying to create intentional communities that are outside in some sense of large scale urban and suburban developments is parallel to the work that people are doing inside of urban and suburban spaces to try to create resilience hubs. You know what I mean? My astro yesterday said we're all going to have to go back to nature. That's what's coming. And we don't know if that's going to be a cataclysmic or if it's going to be a slow decline. But it seems to me that even as we ease back into there, we actually have to produce in the cities as well. And we have to reduce the carbon impact and carbon footprint, and also the psychological and social tension that gets created in urban and suburban spaces by creating sort of more localized and productive and community-controlled communities. So with that, that's all I got. If there is any time for any more questions, I'm game, but otherwise.
Woo! I enjoyed that so much that, well, I just learned a lot, which makes sense because you're my professor. Some things never change. But we would really love to have you back and keep teaching. This is a super great connection. And yeah, I think there's a lot of possible mutual empowerment and exchange that can happen to just continue exploring. Because as you mentioned, like you might not have the full scope of what we have going on. I was just talking with Mike Word yesterday about maybe setting something up for him where he might come back, lead like a whole permaculture design course here, have people come support, learn from him, and also help move forward the vision with this land that we're on right now. And then we've had different indigenous elders that might come stay and have spaces to use here as well, that are also teachers to us. So, you know, I think it would be really cool to just keep sharing with each other more and explore as we get to know what each other's doing. And yeah, I also wanted to mention the homie right here, Alec Arshovsky. We met when we were 2 years old on a playground. we're both Russian. Well, I'm Ukrainian, he's Russian, so we're best friends. But he's like, I won't give the whole intro again because I told people yesterday, but he's basically like kind of a tech genius. And just yesterday his iPhone app was released on the market, and I wanted to mention it to you because it's called Verdance. And Mike Word was telling us to connect with Frontline Farming, I think, or Frontline Farmers, is that the movement? Yeah, so he was telling us to, you know, connect Alec with them and basically exchange some info because the app is incredible. It basically allows people to log in and first of all, if they don't know how to grow food, teaches them to grow their own food. It connects, if you want to mentor someone how to make a garden, you can put that on the app and someone can find you and say, oh, here's a gardening mentor. You can learn how to garden. It can have all kinds of resources and advice on what food to grow where you're at. And then the main point of the app is that you upload, you know, if you have extra produce from your harvest in the neighborhood, you can upload that for sale, for trade, for giveaway. And you can also post what you're looking for that you need more of for free or to purchase or trade. So like if I don't have enough tomatoes from my harvest, but I need more lettuce, put that info in there. We exchange, everyone has what they need. And so it's creating essentially like a decentralized and localized system of food cultivation and food sharing that I think would make an enormous difference in our whole industrial agriculture system if it takes off, you know, in populated areas around the world. So I just think it has a lot of potential and wanted to mention it to you.
Yeah, Alec, let's talk.
Let's definitely talk. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Y'all are longtime childhood friends, and now you're like in this shared dream manifestation. And I think here's my last word to everybody. Be in tune with yourself and you'll be in tune with the stars.
Woo!
He